he said, I'm the youth director here. If you are involved with youth at all, you know that it involves answering a lot of questions. Last summer, we were at camp and we got a golf cart. I had two students who were like bandaged and casted up, and so it was necessary to have a golf cart to kind of get across camp, and they're fun. And one student in particular asked me over and over and over again, Katie, let me drive the golf cart. Let me drive the golf cart. You are 15. You may not drive the golf cart. No, you are 15 and not my own child. You may not drive the golf cart. No, I will get in trouble if you drive the golf cart. Over and over, to the point that I finally, this is not my best moment, said, okay, hon, you cannot talk to me for 30 minutes unless you or somebody else are on fire or bleeding, okay? Just this week, I've gotten a lot of questions. What game are we playing tonight? Over and over again. What game are we playing? Can I be in the game? Can I volunteer? Can I volunteer? Why can't I get along with this person in my life? What do you believe about transgender kids? Those are all questions I've been asked this week, and everything in between. So we know as a parent or a grandparent, questions can be scary, right? We also know that's how kids learn. They learn by asking questions. The world is brand new to them. I remember with one of my kids, she was about 3, we were at a park where they also had a farm. They have this massive pig that's probably still at this farm. It's in South County. And she asked me, well, do pigs make ham? Well, what? Do pigs make ham? Well, they are ham. Which then she just stared at me for a long time and we just continued on. But that's how they learn about things, right? We never know what they're going to ask and when it's going to happen, a lot like Zach just said. But the reason why we do that is to learn. And the same thing is true when we're learning as adults. It's the same thing we see in students now. Somebody just introduced me to this term of generations or cultures, that every generation has its own thing, right? Its own place, its own identity, what it looks like. This is the coolest statement I ever say in my entire life. But when I went to Greece a few years ago, I am not that cool, but I did go to Greece. I went with my friend Katie, and she spent weeks reading every book, everything. And I was like, I'm along for the ride. This is great. We'll just figure it out. It's fine. Okay, so when you go to a foreign country, and yes, they do speak English, it's great to have some background information. So Katie was like, we need to go to this restaurant, we need to stay away from this neighborhood, we should go here, we need to do this. And we needed all of that information. And she learned it by searching, by looking those things up. And it's the same way with students, with our kids and our grandkids. We are learning about them and where they are. And so they're in it's like they're in a completely different country than we're in. And sometimes that can take a bit to get used to, right? Because we are looking at things from our own culture, and they're in a different place, even though we all live in the same house or the same city or the same country. So we're going to talk about 4 things that differ in the culture of your kids and your grandkids that I think are different than the culture that we grew up in, that are different from the culture even maybe like 5 years ago. And then we're going to look at how they affect faith. I think that these 4 things are things that do put a different lens on how kids are looking at what they believe and how they look at Jesus. So the 4 things that we are going to look at are pressure, Gen Z's fluidity, Gen Z being truly post-Christian, and then space to talk. And we'll unpack those things. Today we are using the movie Encanto as our guide. Now, this may not be the greatest movie ever made. It is a really great one, but it is a counselor's dream. There are so many things in this movie that do pertain to real life. And so we're going to look at these 4 things through the lens of that. Let's see. Okay, surface pressure. So we know that Louisa, right? Have you seen this? Okay, I'm just assuming everybody's seen this movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it after this. But Louisa is a sister. Hang on, let me back up. Encanto, if you haven't seen it, it's about this magical family that every single member of the family has been given some sort of a gift, some sort of a magical gift that makes them unique, that gives them almost like a power. And we're introduced to Mirabelle, who is one of the daughters who wasn't given a gift. And so as she kind of explores this place of who she is in the family and how the family works, stuff happens, which leads you to why it's a counselor's dream. So one of the songs is Surface Pressure. So one of the daughters, Louisa, is given the gift of strength. She can lift anything. Like in this picture, she's like holding up like 4 donkeys. Like if they need like a house moved, they're like, hey, Louisa, and she comes running and she moves the house over. Hey, we need this. She runs over and she does that. So there's a lot of expectation on her to perform and to do things. And so in this song, she's describing what that pressure feels like, that is too much. Some of the lyrics I wrote up here, it's kind of hard to see, but it says, but wait, if I could shake the crushing weight of expectations, would that free some room up for joy or relaxation or simple pleasure? Instead, we measure this growing pressure, keeps growing, keep going, because all we know is pressure. And then it goes into the whole song, and your kids probably know it if they've listened to it twice. It's very catchy. In the last 2 lines, see if she can handle every family burden. Watch as she buckles and bends, but never breaks. So it is, I asked a bunch of students like over the last 2 weeks, like, hey, what do you think your parents need to know? And everybody came back to pressure. And it's funny because I talked to friends about it and they're like, haven't we all said that? Like every generation feels like my parents don't understand, or I'm under so much pressure to do things. But I think that there's different things about this generation, of our generation of kids and grandkids, that are experiencing pressure in a different way that I think is important to note. Gen Z reports that they are the most stressed out of any generation, which 62% of them report that, whereas millennials were at 53%. So there's a definite spike in that. One of the things that I think contributes to that is that the fact that their worlds have become too big, and they're privy to things that their minds probably aren't ready to handle. They have access to internet, they have access to social media, all of these things that they're taking in this information about things that are happening in the world, serious things, but their brains are still forming. They should be worrying about their homework, playing tag at school, who's playing kickball, those kinds of things. But they're introduced to these different ideas that their brains just aren't ready to handle, emotionally, spiritually, in all ways. And so they're stuck with that. And they're at a disadvantage as well. I hear this a lot from high school students, that they're privy to all of this information, but they have the inability to affect change. So then they're left with this burden of, I know about all of these things, but what do I do? I don't think all social media is bad. I think that it can be good as well. In the girls' small group that I lead, we were talking about some of the good things. Like my own daughter is in 7th grade, and she is really into art, and she's been able to follow some Instagram accounts that have like art prompts every day and have these different styles. And it's so cool for her, like, to look back on how her art has changed, and it's being influenced in these really cool ways. You can also connect with people. One of my students keeps in touch with the friends that she met at camp last summer. She goes away to a different state for camp, and she's able to talk to these girls that she meets up with every summer. She can talk to them on a daily basis, which is really great, especially in a place where maybe at school she feels a little uncomfortable with who she can relate to. My issue with social media right now, there's a few, but right now, that I keep saying are these trends about social, or about mental health. And this deals with the pressure that kids are experiencing. So for example, there's a trend on TikTok, I've seen it on Instagram some too, but there's real mental health professionals who like have the credentials and everything, but they're using these platforms in maybe not so great ways. So one trend in particular is like hold up 5 fingers. And then they go through a diagnosis. So let's see if you have social anxiety. Okay, so put down your fingers if you can relate to something. Big crowds make me nervous. Being in an enclosed space makes me nervous. I have a hard time talking to new people, and so on. So then at the end, they can say, oh, a student may look at that, or one of our kids might look at that and say, oh, I have social anxiety. Okay, now what do I do with that? So now they have this diagnosis. What do they do with that? First of all, I could say I'm an extrovert. I could say all of those things about me on a day where I didn't get enough sleep. Like, I had a bad day. I don't want to be around anybody. I want to go take a nap. And then you've got a young person who's stuck with a diagnosis that they don't know what to do with. There's no treatment plan. There's no further explanation of what to do with that. And suddenly just those words become an identity. And it begins to replace other language. For example, I was talking to some students last year or something, and one of the students said, well, they were telling me about something that happened that day, telling a few of us, and she said, well, I had this trauma response. I was like, okay, hold on a second. I gotta break in here. And they're like, what? I was like, you have experienced some real trauma in your life, but you are talking about the fact that somebody at school ignored you, and that made you sad. So that feeling is actually sad. That feeling is not a trauma response. It is not directly related to an experience that you had that elicits something that brings you back into that exact same spot. And so kids are beginning to develop this language around mental health that they don't know about. And so suddenly they're dealing with something that's a lot bigger than they are. So that leaves us in a place where they're claiming a language as truth without the knowledge, without the follow-up, without the investment. So this can lead to false narratives about who they are, what they're about, who their identity is. So there's a lot of knowledge around mental health right now, but not a lot of wisdom. The other thing about pressure is I really believe this. So I've got a 4th grader, 5th grader, and a 7th grader, that kids are experiencing pressure at a younger age than they used to, right? I was driving down the road with my 7th grader the other day, and she was talking about her class schedule for next year, for 8th grade. And so she's going over her classes, and she was like, well, I chose French because then now I've taken 2 years of it by the end of this year, so that counts as a high school credit, and I was like, whoa, wait, what? That counts for, you're thinking about that? I had no idea. Like, she already, like in 6th grade, was thinking, I'm going to do French for 2 years so that it counts for that. When I was in middle school, I don't know what was going on. I was not thinking about my high school grades. So they're making choices about middle school that they're making towards high school that then are going to affect college. So she's already kind of moving in that direction, and she just turned 13. It's way too young. And then we've got kids, if you back up, Even in elementary school, like if you take sports, for example, around, or especially around here, I don't know how it is in other places in the country, but you've got to get on this sports team, you've got to practice this many times, you need to be on this many teams, and you need to be connected this way to get on this baseball team so that in middle school you can play here, and so on. You see where I'm going. So a kid who's in 5th grade is like, I want to play baseball. They've never played before. You kind of don't know what to do, which is not okay for a lot of reasons, and we could have a conversation about that in other ways. But we're setting our kids up younger for this performance and success in ways that they should be playing and developing social skills and learning how to be competitive in healthy ways and all of those things. And there is a right and good place for kids who are competitive and want to play at those levels, but it shouldn't exclude every kid, and it shouldn't be at the level where it's affecting their performance when they're late teenagers. And honestly, I see a lot with our students, by the time they get to high school, they're burnt out. They're tired, and they're not even 17. Okay, so the next slide, we are moving on to the family madrigal. So this is the family, all of them together, all of their different gifts and spouses. So Gen Z is fluid. Fluidity is a word that maybe it's a buzzword, I don't know. But it means exactly what it is. It's something that there's no black or white, things are moving, they're intertwined. So for Gen Z, it's not so much this or that, okay, one thing or the other, but it's this and that, awareness and vulnerability, individuality and community, digital and physical, commerce and entertainment, consumption and production, value and values. So they're living in a place where maybe in our generations and older, we think, well, no, there's a definite answer for this. There's a definite place for this. There's a definite, whereas our kids today are seeing more movement in what they believe, which sounds overwhelming and a bit contradictory and kind of a mess. But the fact is that their world has become very non-binary. And so it isn't a simple answer for anything, really. One of the examples that I have of this, that maybe this will clear this up a little bit, is that the way that they look at life. They look at this all being one thing: work, home, school, entertainment, communication. All one thing. Truth, fact, fiction, feeling. Sex, gender, family. They're living in a place where they don't have definite boundaries. So like, for example, and we're seeing this now more in our generations, I think, especially with the pandemic and working from home, but kids at school, they're not just leaving their schoolwork at school, right? They're taking their laptops and their iPads home to continue working on things. Their friends can reach them not just at school. You know, we could leave the drama at school and go home. No, they're following them on their cell phones. And if they don't have a cell phone, they still do it on their school iPads and computers. My daughter can tell you at least 5 different ways that they've gone around ways that they can all talk to each other, and the school eventually figures it out and shuts them down, but they figure out something else. And so we're looking at this place where things are moving together. They're not completely off from one thing or another. Families are more diverse than ever. Only about half of teens today believe that gender is defined by one sex at birth. Roughly 1 in 8 Gen Zers describe their sexual orientation as something other than heterosexual. And about 3 in 10 know someone who has changed their identity. Gender's not a fixed identity or a fixed category in Gen Z. They think about things a lot different than we used to. And so when all of this is normal for our Gen Z friends, but these ideas, I think, I'm guessing, are hard to grasp. And the fact that even like our 4th and 5th grade students are talking about these things, they're not new ideas. And so it's important to know that when we're looking at kids and we're talking to them about things, and they're asking big questions about their faith and what Jesus thinks about people and what Jesus thinks about this social issue and all of those things, they're looking at it from a very different lens than we do. They want to know how Jesus thinks about social justice. In the Bible, it's all social. Like, there's so much social justice. Like, Jesus stood up for people. But when they're looking at it from a fluid direction, all of these things get messy and they start to lose Jesus in that. They start looking at what the big categories are, and it's easy to leave him out. So the next song is Waiting on a Miracle, Faith in Jesus in a Post-Christian Culture. So this song, I would move the mountains, make new trees and flowers grow. Someone please just let me know, where do I go? I'm waiting on a miracle. I would heal what's broken, show this family something new. Who I am inside, so what can I do? A definition of post-Christian that I found is that a post-Christian society is historically based in Christian ideas and follows simplified Christian values, but rejects the authority of Christianity and does not consider it the basis of either its ethics or its culture. The Christian language and expression that once permeated society become rare and superficial in a post-Christian society. So when we are hearing our kids talk about social justice, when they're talking about their friend at school that's gotten forgotten, or their friend at school that's been judged, or how they've been judged, they're using language that you can find in the Bible. But because they're post-Christian in the society, they don't consider Jesus the authority. And so it's kind of backwards, right? So they're looking at the thing and not Jesus. In that language, they're attributing to other things. So when you've got things like social media and the internet, like we were joking back there, we were trying to figure out something on PowerPoint, and the 6 of us that were back there all used Google Slides. And then finally, Jess fabulously Googled what we needed to do. You can find information very quickly. And so that leads us to a place where we're finding information from a lot of different places. And Jesus doesn't have the authority anymore. The Bible doesn't have the authority. I had a couple students during the, when we were locked down, that would every other day would send me a TikTok about, it was people anywhere from a preacher to an 18-year-old kid, these on the videos. They would send me a video and say, what do you think about this? And it would be a video like, actually, it would be like a 20-year-old saying, the Bible was changed in 1974, and so this language is incorrect, and so therefore we cannot look at what this social justice issue is because the Bible is wrong. And then I would get that TikTok, and they'd be like, so what now? Awesome. So I would do like what Zach talked about, slow down. Let's look at this again. Who are we looking at? What are we doing? So there's a lot of talk about Jesus in a post-Christian society, but not a lot of actually looking at him, if that makes sense. So it's not a surprise, I found this article in Christianity Today that I thought was really interesting. I'll just read part of it. In my experience, most of them will claim that they're atheist students. However, once they're talking, I tell them what an atheist is, and they're finding out they're agnostic. They don't know about God, don't care, and don't know if it's worth trying to find out. So it's not a surprise that Gen Z is low biblical literacy. They're less likely than previous generations to be familiar with the Bible, to know how to use it, or to believe the Bible contains anything a person needs to know to live a meaningful life. Since fewer of them know a real-life Christian, often their conceptions of religion come from media. Christianity seems like a Republican thing, a conservative thing, even a Southern thing, or even an anti-masking thing. But even if the Christian label isn't attractive, Gen Z is willing to talk about deep things, questions about injustice, identity, the meaning of life. So if we unpack this a little bit, we see that our students who claim to be atheists, that they don't believe in God, actually don't know about God. And they don't really know anything about God. They don't really know Jesus. And what they are learning is from all of the sources around them. And so that brings us to my last point, which is Bruno. You can't talk about Encanto without talking about the song. We don't talk about Bruno. And my husband and I laugh about this song because, so the song is about Bruno, the estranged uncle, who had this vision that disrupted the family's magical powers and their narrative, right, of who they knew who they were. So he messed it up. But the irony of it, they don't talk about Bruno. He's not a part of the family, but he actually lives in the walls. So they don't talk about Bruno, but he's already there, like he's inside the house. I went to a parenting class with Zach that Zach led, like it had to have been at least 10 years ago. It was when Riverside was in Hickson, and I don't even know if all three of my children were here. But one thing has stood out to me since then that me and some friends like still reference is that Zach pointed out that as parents, we have the privilege to name things before the world does. That we have this opportunity to get in front of our kids and what they're hearing at school. Doesn't always work. Yeah, that doesn't always work, speaking as a parent. But we can try. And we can be aware of all of the things our kids are talking about and what's going on, even with our schools. And so part of that is asking questions. It's knowing where our kids are. Who are they hanging out with? What are they reading in English class? Who are they around at their lunch table? And all of those things might be because you disagree with what's going on, but mostly it should be just so you know what your kids are talking about, just so you know where your kids are. I don't think we need to be afraid of any of those things. We just need to know where they're at and what's happening. So we need to start dialogues with our kids early and often. There really is nothing new under the sun, which comes straight from Ecclesiastes in the Bible. As Christians, we believe that the Bible holds wisdom about holding faith in Jesus, right? This has literally been passed down from generations. It's how the Bible has kept moving forward. As adults, we also have wisdom to be passed down, and we can't overlook that. A lot of times, students will start complaining about their parents. Surprise, which is why my children are in a different small group when they're in youth group, because I know they got to complain about me somewhere. I'm always on the parent side, because usually it's things like, can you believe my parents put a filter on my iPad? Yeah, I can. Actually, ask my daughter, she's got one too. And I'll tell them, like, hey, I'm going to play the adult card. This is not fun, but your parents and I have been through life before. We've been through some stuff. We may not understand where you are specifically, but we have been there. And they don't love that, but it's easier to hear not from your parent, I think, so you're welcome. So we need to educate ourselves about the world they're in. Just like I said at the beginning, like when I went to Greece with my friend Katie, we needed to be educated about where we were going, what was happening. She did that for us. And we all knew this to be true when we were our kids' age. Parents just don't understand. Young people still believe this, and in a lot of ways, the world they're in now is very foreign to us. So even taking the posture of allowing them to teach you is an open door. We're in a unique spot. It's the way that I approach our youth group is that I hope it's a soft space to land. And I think it is, Kids will not come for a really long time and then show up again and say, hey, I got a question. And you kind of brace yourself and say, okay, what is it going to be? Because it could be anything. But it should be a soft place where they can ask questions. And by doing that, there's a few things that we try to do in our youth group to make that possible. One of those things, and it's a lot of what Zach already talked about, is treating the kid like they're the expert in their own life, because they're going through it. And so the first thing when a kid comes to me and says, hey, what does the Bible say about sex? Okay. Where do you get your information? Where do you learn? Okay. Social media? Who do you follow? What does that look like? What do they tell you? School? What did they tell you in class? Okay. What do your friends say? What are they doing? What is the internet? What do your searches look like? What's going on there? What have your parents told you? Have you talked to your parents? What would they say about this? What does church say? What do you think the Bible says about this? We gather all of that information. They're being told all day, every day what to do. You need to do this to succeed. You need to do this to have the perfect eyeshadow. You need to do this to succeed in band. You need to do this. You need to do that. Tell me what you think. Where are you at? I want them to tell me what they know and what they've learned. Sometimes it's false information. Sometimes it's half-truths. It's like when Zach was going through that. You don't start with pointing those things out. You start with pointing out, okay, what's true? Who is trustworthy in that list that we talked about? Is your internet search and your social media curated so that you can hear what you want to hear? Or is your algorithm out of control? Like, when I search for new socks and then there's 8 million socks ads and people talking about them on Instagram? Weird. Is that where we're getting all of our information? And then we talk about their core beliefs. We bring it back to Jesus. One of my favorite questions to ask students is, how are you in Jesus? That opens the question. I don't want to know how many times you've been to church. I don't want to know what you think about youth group. I know, how are you in Jesus? So hopefully through this process and asking questions, we can identify their core beliefs. We can turn back to Jesus. We can turn back to what's important. Maybe point out where they're hearing false information. And empowering them to ask questions, to not just consume information, to not just consume pressure, not consume what the world is telling them about all of these things, but that they can begin to consider them themselves and where they will look for information. There's a quote by Brennan Manning. I think it's on a slide. Yeah. Expectations are subtle attempts to control God and manipulate mystery. We can get so wrapped up in them that when Jesus breaks into our lives in new ways, in surprising ways, we neither recognize him nor hear his message. We get so caught up in who we think God is through the lens of the world, which is what young people are doing now. We don't actually see God himself. We just see the thing. By talking with kids and allowing them space to process their own way, we're giving them freedom to own their faith in Jesus, to make their faith their own. We have a lot of kids in our youth group who've grown up in church. I didn't grow up in church, and so this took a little bit of getting used to, but we constantly say, what do you believe? It's not enough for your parents to believe for you, or the fact that you've grown up in a church to know all of these things. What do you know? My goal for the end of their time in youth group is to be able to go off to college or a job or a different school or wherever they wind up after high school, to be able to find a community of believers, to know that they could open their Bible, to know that Jesus is trustworthy. I don't necessarily care what scripture they memorized. I don't care at all. I just hope they know where to go. A friend of mine told me, we're kind of talking about this, and if your kid is in youth group, they've heard this because I keep talking about it everywhere. But a friend of mine was telling me about the show that she watched on Netflix, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's about about a community in Alaska. And I think it's a reality show, but I've heard anyway, I really want to watch it, but time. And but she was saying that in Alaska, there's blizzards and there's all the snow and like nothing that we could imagine, right? And so people live in a really remote area, and if they're if they need to go do something and it becomes a whiteout and major blizzard, they actually have to tie a rope from their house to, say, their barn. Because if you were to just walk out of your house and walk to the barn, you'd get lost. You literally would lose the direction that you were going. And so they tie this rope so that they can follow the rope to the farm or to the barn where they need to work and check on animals for the day. And she pointed out, isn't that what we're trying to do with kids? Like, Jesus is that rope. Like, no matter what is being thrown at them or what is going on, I hope that in spite of this learning about this culture that they're in, we're pointing them back to where they can grab their rope so that they can get from one place to the other. And so that takes a little bit of humbleness because sometimes even my own kids in my house, I'm like, what are you saying? I don't understand. But that's an opportunity to not be like, you guys are ridiculous, or you have no idea what you're talking about, but to say, can you explain this to me? I don't understand. I'm old. That's fine. Just explain it to me. And then we can talk about it. And then I am able to share some things I know because we've opened the dialogue together to be able to talk about it. And I learn things from them too. I learn from my kids how to really love people that are questioning, that are in different places, that look a lot different than I do. And so it's worth it.